Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Julie Cashion, the Director of Women's Economic Justice and a Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation, a progressive think tank based in New York and DC. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you and to be co-hosting this event with the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality. We're here today to talk about women, work, and care, the pandemic and its aftermath. It's such an important topic, and I hope you'll help us elevate the topic by feeling free to tweet or use other social media to elevate the conversation and use the hashtag Women Work Care. So in November, academic Jessica Calerco explained what the pandemic had revealed, which is that other countries have safety nets, the US has women. Millions of women around the nation felt this acutely over the past 17 months as the pandemic and the ensuing economic crisis closed schools, childcare programs, reduced the ability to rely on family, friends, and neighbors, and required unexpected time doing unpaid caregiving or providing support for remote learning, while also, of course, managing work. This spring, the Census Bureau estimated that 1.5 million American mothers have yet to return to the workforce, with women of color affected disproportionately. So here I want to welcome our featured speakers, Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh and Gloria Riviera, the host of No One Is Coming to Save Us, the podcast. If you've not yet listened to this podcast, you have to do it. It's so good. So subscribe to it right now, wherever you get your podcasts. I know it's on Spotify. That's where I listen to it. And while you do that, Mr. Secretary, I'm hoping we can get started with you. If you could share a little bit about why these care issues resonate for you and what your experience has been with caregiving or needing care personally.
Yeah, Julie, first of all, thank you for having me today. I'm pretty excited about the conversation. And I'm also excited about the work that's happening here in Washington, D.C. right now under the Biden-Harris administration. Caregiving to me, it means an awful lot. I mean, as a child, I came down with cancer at birth, lymphoma. And my parents spent a lot of time obviously caring for me, and the nurses and doctors at the Children's Hospital in Dana-Farber took good care of me as well. And that was a tough time. And then my brother was a baby at the time, and really had him, people taking care of him, family members taking care of him. So I think it was, I wasn't cognizant of it at the time, but understanding caregiving was such a big part of it. As my father got older, my brother and my mother were his caregivers. We didn't put him in a home. He was sick at home, and having that support, family support, was really important. We were fortunate to have that. And now, I spend a lot of time when I'm home caring for my mother to make sure that, shopping and doing things. But in my roles as an elected official, whether it was a state representative or mayor of the city of Boston, the need for caregiving is really, really important in our communities to allow people to live with dignity and respect. And in my role as Secretary of Labor, we're working now on a bill. It's literally a CARES infrastructure bill. That caregiving is a big part of that. Is a recommendation for $400 billion into the CARES economy, into adult care, into child care, and really working to improve the quality of life for the people that are doing the work. But also improve the quality of life of people getting the care. And when you think about our society, care is such an important aspect of it, and caregiving is such an important aspect of it. And we don't always, I think in some circles, people don't see it until they have to experience it themselves. So it's kind of been in my DNA from the very beginning. And it's something that as Secretary of Labor, I'm going to push really hard for. And I think subconsciously, let's go back to my beginning. Caregiving is a big part of people taking care of me in my life and moving forward. And I was fortunate in my family. Other people don't have that opportunity.
Thank you so much. That sets us up so well for the conversation we're looking forward to hearing between you and Gloria. So Gloria, please go ahead and take it away.
Well, let me just say, Mr. Secretary, it is an honor to have you with us, and it's an honor to be here to be able to have this conversation with you. What strikes me when I hear you talk about your childhood is something you didn't mention, but resonated, that the nuns in your school, when you went back to school, you would be tired from the chemo and you might fall asleep, and they would look out for you. They would make sure the other kids didn't bother you, whether it was in the classroom or, avoiding, the normal hazing that would go on the playground. And the word that struck me was this community, that so many different people came together to create this community of care for you. And whether we're talking about elder care or early 0 to 5 child care, it's that idea of community. And it leads me to this question that now you have this tremendous role as Secretary of Labor to effect the kind of change workers are calling for. We have a lot to talk about the kinds of rights workers should be asking for as we move forward. But what do you see as your vision for the department right now? And how can we start to move beyond all those incredibly touching stories about, the nuns looking out for you in the classroom, and stop thinking about them as personal individual stories and begin to think of them as universal issues with collective solutions? How do we put all of our stories together and move forward to get personal stories into public policy?
Thank you. And I should have given the Sisters of Charity Halifax a shout out on the call. And if any of them are watching this, I'm going to get a call on this now. But you're absolutely right. And caregiving is a community in a lot of ways, and it's supporting one another. I was in St. Louis. I'll be honest with you. I've been in the shop for 4 months now, and I understand the role of the Secretary of Labor, and I understand the magnitude of the Secretary of Labor. And I understand the infrastructure bill that the president has filed, the Build Back Better agenda, which is the CARES infrastructure. And I knew that it was important. But I was at an event in St. Louis last week. It was a church basement, which I've been in many church basements. And it was caregivers talking about their work, which I've been in many church basements talking about that. And one woman, young woman, her name was Monique. She spoke. She was a caregiver, and she was talking about how she made $12.65 an hour. And I was there advocating or explaining the infrastructure bill. It wasn't like anything else before. Before, we would be talking about a piece of legislation or talking about something hopeful. But this is something that we're close to achieving. And she just started crying and just really, her emotion came out because of her fear of where she is in her life and where she is with her family and not making enough money. And she talked about the person she took care of, and the community that was in that room that day all surrounded her. And she's a caregiver giving care to people. And the room was full of caregivers and people being taken care of, and they supported her. And I just sat back and watched this, and I gave her a hug too, but I sat back and watched this, and I thought to myself, the CARES community, it really is a community. It's a unique community. Because it's a community of people that are loving, that are caring, that take care of our most precious family members, whether it's children in daycare or adults in a day program or long-term care facilities or simply coming into the home. And I do think that we're at a unique moment in time that as a CARES economy, it really is a community. And I think that we have to continue to make sure we push for that community, because that community, this last 18 months or 17 months, I guess you can say, had it as hard as anybody. No one necessarily talked about the CARES community during the pandemic. We talked about essential workers and grocery store clerks, and God love them, and delivery drivers and first responders and hospitals and nurses and doctors. But the care community didn't necessarily get the same spot on the pedestal that they deserve. So I think that as I think about it, and as we think about it, it is a community, and it's supporting our loved ones, but also supporting each other.
Right. One of the things that I learned through the podcast that I did about the childcare crisis in this country is that I now think of myself, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't before, as a childcare voter. I want to know how my representatives invest in that, what their plans are. I know you're a part of President Biden's jobs cabinet, but what strikes me is that you seem to understand this connection between the built infrastructure, between roads and bridges, and the care economy, the care infrastructure that we just talked about. So what is that connection? What does that look like for you? Is it in the new proposal because it's all being presented together, or is it a little bit different than that?
Well, I think that, I'm a building trade guy, I come out of the construction trade. So the physical infrastructure piece is important. But when President Biden talked about infrastructure, he talked about physical infrastructure and human infrastructure. It's all connected. I mean, it's all connected, whether it's the trains you take to a care, or the roads you drive to care, or the person that's taking those roads driving to care. They're all interconnected. But I do think that, in this country, we have made investments in physical infrastructure. We have made investments in new bridges and new roads being built, and we're doing all that. But we've never really truly, the government, at least to my knowledge, the federal government has never really truly made an investment like the one that President Biden's proposing in this CARES economy. And you think about this, we have people in this country who are driving on the new roads we're going to be having, making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Yet the person that's taking care of our loved ones making $12.65. And it's his or her, mostly people, women of color, a lot of immigrants. It's their second or third job. So I think that this infrastructure is an investment. It's an investment. It's an investment in, it's not an allocation. It's an investment in the CARES economy. And I think that that's so key, that as we talk about it, we think about investments, and we think about the investment in whether it's skilling somebody up, whether it's treating them fairly, paying better wages, or having better care. These investments are so key at this particular moment in time.
So how do we convince people to pass this legislation? Because the American Rescue Plan and pandemic relief packages together, that's more money than we've seen put towards this since World War II, which is a great thing. Now that we're getting, hopefully, if more people get vaccinated and we come together, we'll come out of COVID. But even the funding on the table now returns us to a place that I would argue is untenable in the entire care world. So one question is, how dangerous do you see that possibility being, and how do you see the impact of the American Rescue Plan, and how do you see the American Jobs and Families Plans building on the foundation that the current funding might return us to, if that makes sense?
No, it does. And I think that, when you look at the poll numbers for the American Rescue Plan, which is already passed, or the American, formerly known as the Jobs Plan and Families Plan, now known as the bipartisan infrastructure bill for the roads and bridges, and the Build Back Better agenda for the CARES economy, American people want it. American people like it. And I think that we need to, in some cases, stop being polarizing everything by Democrats and Republicans and putting a line in the sand. And the president has made it very clear that he's putting the American people first. This bill's not about Democrats. This bill's not about Republicans. It's about individuals. And I don't care if you're the most conservative member of Congress or you're the most liberal member of Congress. You have constituents in your district that need an investment in the CARES economy, whether it's childcare or whether it's adult care or it's job training, what have you. And I just think that, right now I'm looking at the participants, it's 107 people on here. Take myself out of it and you out of it, it's 105 people that need to take a peek at this and say, wait a second, we need this. This is something that's really important for our country, and it's about moving our country forward. And just as important as building roads and technology to keep our stature on a world stage economically, that's great. But we also have to look at the other side and say, wait a second, we need to keep our stature as a people that respect the dignity of our older residents and the people that need care. We need to treat them with the same respect and dignity. So as we're becoming a leader in technology in the world, we need to be a leader in as well as in the CARES economy.
Right. Somebody told me recently at a Little League game, someone very high up in the government, that we need to think about childcare and the care economy as human infrastructure, right? It's how people get to where they need to go in any way, shape, or form. And I remember after I had my first child, what struck me was that the expectations had not changed on me when I went back to work. If anything, they had become more intense and more deadline intensive, and there was no help, which I think leads to people feeling very alone. No doubt they felt like that during COVID. You took moves as mayor of Boston to put money in the hands of small business owners, women in particular. I saw an interview with a woman of color, I think it was in Florida. And my question is, how do you think that these needs should be addressed, and why does implementation matter? Where should the money go? What parameters should there be around how it's used? Who should be in charge of making decisions on how they use it?
Well, I think it depends on where we are, but one of the things we tried to do in Boston, did in Boston, was really focus on underserved communities, women, people of color, when it came to businesses. And also when you think about, we did paid family leave in the city of Boston. We did 12 weeks paid family leave. And often the communities that get hit the hardest, that don't have the luxury and I won't, maybe luxury is too strong of a word, but don't have the sick time or don't have the benefits, are people in the communities of color and women. So we need to make sure that as we think about coming out of the pandemic and we think about this opportunity in front of us, is that we come back better than we were, and really be intentional about the investments that we're making. And some of those investments we made on a state and local level, and some of those investments we made on a federal level. And the president's been very clear in all of his packages is that equity is at the center of a lot of those packages to make sure that we're making the proper investments and people are all getting lifted up. And in the past, that hadn't been the case. That hadn't been the case at all. I was on a Zoom earlier today, and we were talking about the investments in right after World War II with the GI Bill, the investments with the New Deal, and most of the people that benefit from that was the white community and white men. And it wasn't, we left a whole bunch of people out, maybe unintentionally, out of that conversation. Well, now we learn 60, 70 years later, where there's big economic gaps and there's big racial inequities and gaps and gender inequities and gaps. And now we have an opportunity to do something special. As I think about, the CARES economy, we could talk about, we could do a whole conversation on pay equity and gender equity. Well, by lifting the wages of the CARES economy workers, 90% of those workers are women. 90% of those women are women of color. So maybe not 90% women of color, 90% of women, and I think 80 plus women of color. We have a real opportunity here to not only address the issue of care and caregiving, but actually start to tackle equity and pay equity as well while we're doing it.
Right. They go hand in hand. In the podcast, we look at when our country has invested federal dollars into childcare, and that was during World War II, right? That was the 40s, where they created high quality, accessible, affordable care to all the women who went back to work to support the war effort. And then when the war was over, that disappeared. Do you think that kind of effort is possible today for both childcare, elder care, and obviously including paid leave into that? I suppose the question is, where does it start in your mind for where these dollars need to go right away?
I think that it is possible, number one, and I think it's an absolute necessity for our country to move forward to do that. We have to, in World War II, after World War II, I'm assuming part of the reason why the money went away is because a lot of the women went back home. And today you have women that are working. Large population of women are now women and men. They're working jobs, and they're a big part of our economy. Families need to have, both people working, women, people in the workforce. So I think it's a necessity. That's why I think President Biden has doubled down on the CARES economy to make sure that this is a long-term investment. This is not a quick, let's do it for a couple of years. This is a long-term investment. I think that's why you see states around the country and cities around the country who introduced universal pre-kindergarten. That's part of what this plan is as well. Boston was able to bring universal pre-kindergarten. That's why you have large corporations in this country that are focused on creating paid family leave and medical leave for their employees because of opportunities. So I think it's essential for us as we move forward to make this a reality. I don't think we can. I think if we don't take action on this right now and we miss this opportunity, it's not going to help our country moving forward.
And what will that look like? I mean, I guess the tough question to ask here is, what are the consequences for the labor force and for our economy if these bills do not get passed? What did you see in Boston? What do you hope not to see countrywide?
Well, I'll show you this right now. 4 million women lost their job during the pandemic. 2.2 roughly are back in the workforce. 1.8 million women still are not back in the workforce. You think about the economic damage that it does to our economy, number one. And number two, the opportunities that are lost here. So there's tremendous economic consequences, but there's also human consequences. We have opportunities. Studies show that if we get young people into school at an early age, at 3 and 4 years old, their outcomes are significantly better. If young people have good, high quality, childcare, their outcomes are better. I mean, there's opportunities. And what happens is you also strengthen the family. If the president's plan on paying for this child care comes across, what's going to happen? Nobody's going to pay more than 7% of their nobody in the middle class lower will pay more than 7%. That allows families to have more money in their pocket to be able to put more, either a better roof over their head or create better opportunities themselves. So this is about our economic ecosystem. That, you know, we could have two companies from Wall Street talking about the importance of business, and when they're talking, they should be talking about the importance of having good, strong childcare for their employees, good, strong paid family leave policies for their employees, good, strong healthcare for their employees. So if they have sick loved ones, they can take care of them. This is all about the future of work in America.
Right. It makes me think of Quebec. In the podcast, we look at Quebec, which is a very small province in Canada. But in 1996, it was, I think, they started universal childcare for 0 to 5s, charging $5.50 a day. It's now gone up to something around $8.50 a day for good, high quality childcare. And they talk about more women primarily in the workforce doing, guess what, paying taxes. And they're doing that because they know their children are in a good, safe place getting good care. I always like to say that time is the most precious asset for any parent, and that is certainly true in that case. I want to ask you what you think about corporate responsibility here, because we also discovered in the podcast that 4% of U.S. companies, if we have that right, which I think we do, offer some kind of childcare. Now we're talking about wait lists and can you get in and how close is it to your place of work? How should we be thinking about corporate responsibility in terms of the care economy?
Well, I think if you talk to those 4% of the companies that offer childcare and the companies in our country that offer paid family leave, what they're going to tell you is that the retention for their employees is high. The ability to recruit people to their companies is high because it's somewhat of a benefit. You have an opportunity to do so many more things, and I do think corporations have a responsibility here in society to help us with this, moving this forward. I think that you know, again, when I think about this plan as a mayor, when I thought about mayor, if I thought about, you know, a new road, new sidewalks, better traffic patterns, companies could recruit people to come to the city of Boston and work there, and then we could get the best talent, and then you have colleges. So it's a complete ecosystem that I think that companies should want to try and offer as much as they can to their employees, because they'll have employees working for them. And then if we can double that down with doing good job training in our country, and then have a strong cares economy helped by corporate America, including the federal government, think about who we could be and what we could be. You mentioned Quebec. I'm sure that, I don't have the numbers, but I'm sure that the outcomes for those young people that were in pre-kindergarten are so much better than they were beforehand. We can have that as a society. We spend too much time talking about, you know, the last 4 months I've been answering questions. Well, you know, you have 8.5 million people out of work, and you have more jobs than than people to fill them. And how do you fill them? Well, you fill them by training and skilling people up and encouraging people to get into the workforce. And if you have the safety there for them, whether it's childcare, adult care, or, you know, all paid family leave, then people are going to come back into the workforce. But if they're forced to stay home because they have to take care of their kids, or they have to take care of they have no place to bring their kids, or they have to take care of their elderly parent, well, what do we expect?
Right. Well, I'm going to leave it on that very positive note, because you just said something to the effect of the encouragement for people to get back into the workforce. And I know we certainly want that for those over 1 million women who have not come back to the workforce since COVID. And we want it overall. And you're right, Quebec will say it has been a smash success in that little province. They see more people than ever staying in the workforce after they decide to have families. So Secretary Walsh, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. What is your advice to everyone out there? I would say from your lips to the ears of Congress and to the voting rights of Congress. So what would you say to people out there to move this forward, as we said, to take these personal stories and turn them into public policy?
What I would say is do it for Monique. And I just say that story because I'm not sure I explained this correctly when I said it, but her story and her emotion made me think of the magnitude of the job I'm in right now and the moment that we're all living in. And I think that, you know, some of us on the podcast, on the call today, I should say, have, you know, the benefit of not having to worry about the things we're talking about. But there are millions and millions of families in America that are worrying right now. They're struggling about the next meal, how do they keep their rent over their head? You know, will their kids be able to get into a good, decent school? we have an opportunity to change the trajectory for millions of Americans moving forward. So I would say, let your voices be heard. Let your voices be heard. Those of us that have it, and we're fortunate enough to have it, let our voices be heard. You know, think back to our parents. I'm one generation removed from two immigrant parents that came to this country with nothing. And I'm sitting in Washington as Secretary of Labor. I mean, I'm the luckiest person in the world. And many of us have that story. So let's advocate on behalf of the people that can't advocate for themselves.
Yeah, yours is a good story. Let's hope for a good story for all those millions of Americans out there. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us on behalf of everyone here and on this call. We really appreciate your time. You have a big job ahead of you, and we're all behind you.
Thank you. Thanks, Gloria. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. And I know Secretary has to hop off to get to another call, but Gloria, I do want to give you a chance just to have any final thoughts that you want to share before we move into our panel. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Julie. You know, I have to say, it's an honor to be able to speak to someone in a position that has the ability to effect change. I think his heart is in absolutely the right place. I also think this takes the conversation to a very important level. It's one thing to tell a story that resonates with people, but there's so much work to be done after that. So if you have not listened to the podcast, go binge it. It's highly digestible. And what we've seen is that it does create a community around an issue. And there's community around experience, there's community around shared experience, but this is about community around an issue. And over from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who said, literally, go out, call your state representative, use your voice, figure out if you're a child care voter. What does the person who's on the docket right now, how do they feel about this? Know the answer to those questions, and then go out and support the people who are behind what you believe needs to happen in this country.
Well, I'm so glad you are now a child care voter, and hopefully many others are are care voters. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you'll be able to stay and hear from our panel, and would like to now introduce our amazing panelists to continue the conversation. Thank you. Diana and Raquin, Indy, Josie. Oh, well, you guys, we have a hard act to follow. I'm going to turn it over to the amazing Diana Lamanji to get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so much to Secretary Walsh. And I found myself nodding all along with all the excellent points he was making and sharing the story of the caregiver. Stories are really important. So thank you, Secretary Walsh. Gloria, thank you so much for your superb interviewing. And again, I'm Diana Lamanji. I'm the host of a podcast called Parenting in Politics. I also do a lot of advocacy surrounding childcare. And we're going to dive right in. Before we start the conversation, a reminder, if you want to share any nuggets, anything you like, anything you want to uplift on Twitter or any social media platform, make sure you use the hashtag Women Work in Care. And with that, we'll start. So the first thing I want to open up by talking about like the aha moment, right? I feel like in this work, my experience has been that when we come into the space as regular people who kind of become advocates, it happens because we have this aha moment. And for me, the aha moment was when I was pregnant and I had just started a new job and I was going through and trying to figure out like what the next steps were. And I discovered that I didn't have any paid leave. And I also, in reading all the materials, it was a union position at a, very well-off organization. And I realized that they referred to paid leave as a perk. It was a benefit that kind of a certain level of executive or, administrative position got. And because we were in this union and it was clerical and we didn't get it. So that was kind of like my aha moment. And to add to that, my spouse is not from this country. He is from a European country where they get all that stuff. So you can just imagine I was frustrated and upset and angry and ready to like roll up my sleeves and be like, okay, like, where do I go? What do I do? Who do I call? Who do I tweet at, etc. So that was many, many years ago. My son is now 10 and I have a 4-year-old. So that's kind of my little background. So I want to start with that aha moment, because I think a lot of us think paid leave, we think parents, but that aha moment doesn't only happen for parents. It also happens, when you have a sick parent, or maybe your spouse gets sick and you need to figure out how to take care of them, or your, parents are aging. Many of us are part of the sandwich generation. My parents are in their 70s, thankfully still healthy, but they live nearby and they help me with childcare and I kind of help them. So I want to talk about that aha moment. So for everyone on the panel, kind of just give us that aha moment in terms of care issues, if you had one, and how that influences your work and what perspective you bring to this work.
Thanks, Diana. I'll start us off. As I mentioned, I'm Josie Calipani, the Director of Women's Economic Justice and a Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation. I have two stories to share. So one is that over 20 years ago, because getting older, as a political science major at the University of Michigan, that was my first aha moment. I was a senior in college and I started to realize my mom had been a stay-at-home mom. I was coming from this very privileged place, and I'd been working my butt off to have this high impact career that I wanted to have. And just had this moment of, wait, I want to be a mom. I want to be an engaged mom like my mom was, but I also want to have this great career. Like, how am I going to do that? So, idealistic 21-year-old that I was like, I'll just solve this through public policy before I have kids and solve it for everyone. It'll be great. So that's, I drove to Washington, D.C. in a U-Haul like a few days after I graduated, like off to save the world. So ever since then, I've been so honored to work in this community of people, to be able to be a part of trying to make this difference. I have been able to help New Jersey become the second state to have paid family and medical leave, and now we have many more states that have that. And my son is now 7, so still working on that. My other just quick story is during COVID, where my stepfather was recovering from a bad accident in a rehab facility, and my husband and I were trying to figure out how to deal with remote learning for our then kindergartner. And I had a great solution, which was, we'll just move in with my mom. And she's a retired teacher, like she can deal with the remote learning, although teaching her Zoom had challenges. But, we could then have a great solution. She wouldn't have to be lonely. But the day I was about to ask her about this, my stepfather, they decided he would come home from the nursing home because it was scary to have people in nursing homes or rehab facilities during COVID. And so he ended up coming home, and I couldn't help my mom, who now had to help care for her partner, and she couldn't help us care for our kid. And so we kind of struggled like the millions of other families trying to figure it all out. So this is why I do this work, but I also just appreciate that over the decades, thanks to amazing teachers, I've realized that, my privilege story is one piece of it, but there's so much historical racism and sexism that are part of this. And that is really core to my mission now as well. So Josie, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thanks, Julie, for sharing that. And it's great to be with you all today. My name is Josie Calipani. I'm the Deputy Director at Family Values at Work, and I use she, hers pronouns. And I love this question. The 8 million things always swirl in my head at the same time. I'm the parent of immigrants who migrated here in the late 80s. And so this sort of reality of inequities of living in the United States, but being from Malawi, Africa, a developing country, were always so real. And this sort of vast difference between a developing country and what people had access to back home in Malawi while also being here was just a reality all the time. And growing up in an immigrant household, watching my parents try to navigate systems, try to do everything right, in air quotes, was just always ever present in my life. But I'll never forget one of my first jobs after undergrad, where I was working as a social worker, helping families who were on public programs, primarily Medicaid, try to access benefits and services. And I could not figure out why families could not access the things that they needed to access in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. It just didn't make sense to me. I knew the application forward and backwards. I could get it done in less than 2 hours. And then families had to wait 2 months before hearing of anything. And at that time, I was helping families who had a youth in crisis. And I will never forget a single mother who had 4 kids. Her youngest was 9 and was having trouble in school. And she was on all of the waiting lists and we had gone through all of the application processes, and she needed a mental health assessment to get her kid back in school who had been suspended. And she was on a 2-month waiting list to get a mental health assessment for her kid. And in the meantime, it meant that she was trying to figure out what hours her neighbor could watch her kid, what hours she could sneak off to work, what 15-minute block she could sneak away for a phone call. And none of it made sense to me. It was interesting because in that moment, I had always put my family outside of the system because we were immigrants and I knew the challenges that immigrants had. But trying to work through this for historically American families who had been here for generations, who still could not access the benefits they had. Even though she was working, she was a great mom, her kids were doing great in school, she was also doing everything right. And in a moment when she needed services and supports, they were nowhere to be found. And that was my first tipping moment. But we have all of these moments all the time, I feel like, that revive us and renew us in a different way. And my most recent one, I think that really sits heavily on me, is last year. My dad retired a couple years back, and in his retirement, he was spending half his time here in the United States and half his time back home in Malawi. My parents have all sorts of projects back home. And last year, he got sick when he was in Malawi, and I remember it was different. He was chronically sick. My mom had been his caregiver for the past 2 decades, and they made it work. But this time felt different, and my mom was in a panic about it, and it sent all of us into a panic. And I will never forget, and he passed away last year as a result of this moment. And I will never forget being in Illinois with my mom as she was trying to figure out the latest time she could leave to go join him in Malawi to be with him, because she was cobbling together how much leave she had left. And it was in that moment that I was like putting all of these life experiences together. And it was one of these moments where no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, no matter how you got to this country, no matter what you've done as far as education, life, family, this moment is going to come. And that our current environment, our current systems are not actually set up for us to live into the fullness of our lives and to live into the fullness of being there for our families. Raquin.
Thank you, Josie, for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And Diana, thank you for having me here today. So my name is Raquin Mabu. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Managing Director of Policy and Research and Chief Economist at the Groundwork Collaborative. And to be honest, I don't know that I've ever had a singular sort of aha moment. I've been working on issues of inequality pretty much my entire career. And I think that lens has really shaped how I look back on a lot of things, right? I think about the challenges my parents had raising me and my brother, particularly my mom, who was working part-time, she was going to school part-time, she was raising 2 children full-time. And it's just basically impossible not to see the absence of the care infrastructure in that story. And more recently, these issues have really hit home for me in multiple ways. Very recently, I have now 2 grandparents left. One was my husband's mother, and one is my own grandmother. And watching our parents navigate elder care is really hard, and it's hard knowing that it's coming for us, right? Like we're on the front lines in just a couple of years, and so these issues, I think, like Josie, you said it really well. I mean, every single one of us will provide or need care at some point in our lives. It's literally a part of being a human being, and care is that scaffolding that holds all of us up. It allows our entire society and economy to function. And so as someone who looks at things from an economic policy perspective, it's very true that our government has a moral responsibility to ensure that we can all grow up, grow old with dignity. But I also think it's important to note how much the costs we all bear when we don't have a care infrastructure, right? There are massive economic costs, massive economic benefits that we're leaving on the table because we are choosing to have policies that don't support us in that moment. And so, that's really, I think, what drives me in this work, and really looking forward to this conversation. And I will pass it on to Indy.
Thank you, Raquin, and thanks, Julie and Diana, for hosting us. Where to begin? I think my story is somewhat similar to Josie's. My family immigrated. Actually, I was 3 years old when we came here, and I didn't learn this story till later, but my father had to sort of beg a local preschool to kind of let me jump the wait list. But they could not figure out how to get me, in safe hands. He worked the night shift at banks and hotels, and I vividly remember that he was essentially sleeping when he was this person who had to take care of me because he had to work late, and I would just sit by him when he was in bed, and I would play with my Legos, what few Legos I had then. And then I remember years later, I gave my mother a hard time because she took 10 plus years to finish her PhD, and she sort of snapped back and said, "Why do you think I took 10 years to finish my PhD?" And it kind of hit me. Well, yeah, that now it's quite an accomplishment when you think about it. While she was helping raise me and my sister, and my father changed jobs, but worked a lot. And then I think a lot about my own partner, and she has gone through 2 pregnancies. And I just think about how, after a pregnancy, when you are just completely drained in some cases, you're going through physiological and mental health challenges often that are unlike anything you might have experienced previously. There you are, you have this new being to care for. And we couldn't have done it without help, without her cobbling together some paid time off, me as well. And when I think about the sort of perspective I bring to this conversation, in so many ways, we are fortunate, and we still struggle almost every day with care one way or another. Virtually every career decision I've made for the last 10 years, and my spouse's too, have been related to care, and whether it was caring for loved ones, sometimes financially, or in other cases directly, like when they're recovering from surgeries and things like that. And if we're struggling, and you look around and you look at the workers, and how poorly compensated they are, and how impossible it is for care workers to afford the care they need themselves, you have to step back and think about, how do you make a system like this work? And we spent a lot of time doing policy design and cost estimates, and looking at research on and evidence on what the most effective social policy would be. And it is just impossible to spend time at that and escape the conclusion that no society can meet its care needs without massive public investment. And that's why I'm particularly excited to join this conversation. We are truly potentially on the brink of doing something that we should have done generations ago. And the truth is, that's often the best we get out of crises. But if we're looking for silver lining in this absolutely tragic and devastating pandemic that continues, I hope we truly do come out of it understanding and appreciating that the entire economy, one way or another, depends on care. That includes informal care, and it includes formal care. So when I think about the care economy, I don't just think about formal paid care. I think the care economy includes all the loved ones stepping up and stepping in, and in particular, hopefully giving people meaningful choices, which I think we can maybe discuss later. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
And that is a perfect segue to the next question, which is that we've been talking about this for a long time. And Indy, as you said, we've been talking about this literally for generations, right? Literally for generations. Like, I think when Nixon was president, we almost did it, right? But then it didn't happen. So and funny story, Julie and I met because before COVID, I moderated a panel about the childcare crisis before COVID. So we have been talking about it a lot. And before, it was kind of like the advocates and mostly women or moms talking about it. But like you said, Indy, one of the silver linings of this devastating moment that we've lived as a country and as a world is that it's kind of put it all out there. And now it's kind of like the advocates and the women and the moms aren't the only people talking about it, because it is in your face. Like, everyone is struggling. Let's talk about this moment. How is this moment different? And I don't know if Indy, you want to start, or.
Sure, I'm happy to. I mean, you think about the American jobs and family plans, and the immediate thing you think about is, I think if you appreciate the importance of care, they go hand in hand. They're one and the same. Jobs sustain families, and we're, we have all sorts of challenges, economic challenges in this country, short-term, long-term. People are concerned about automation and artificial intelligence and outsourcing, and this is a way to create good jobs. That's a choice we have to make. This is a way to create good jobs right here at home. And then I think a lot about the fact that in this moment, people are appreciating exactly what I think Raquin and others have said here, which is gender, racial, and other inequalities are holding us back. I mean, the contrasts are stark. You've got a few private citizens who can literally reach space, while millions can't reach the full potential here that Josie was talking about. You have an economy that's been put off balance for half a century. And I do think that we're finally at a moment where people are open to course correcting after seeing the damage, the lost potential, and especially to women, children, families, communities, but frankly to our democracy. I think care and women together, and that includes women being able to work and have real meaningful choices, I think really fueled the economy, and we finally have a moment where national leaders seem to appreciate that.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I mean, I was really struck by what Secretary Walsh said in the opening. He said, people don't see it until they experience it themselves, right? And I think that's really the moment that we're in. COVID-19 has exposed exactly how fragile our care infrastructure is, not just for the duration of this crisis, but for decades and decades and decades, what people have been going through. And folks who haven't had to engage with the idea of taking care of somebody or providing care have all of a sudden been thrust into those roles, and they are seeing it for the real hard labor that it is. And I want to sort of drill down on that point, because I think recognizing care work as work is actually something that has turned in the last couple of years. And it's really important because we have underinvested in care as a society because we have not seen it as real work, right? And we haven't seen it as real work because of the toxic combination of racism and sexism. Care work is work that is largely performed by Black, Brown, and immigrant women. It's not just their work that has historically been seen as less valuable, it is their lives that have been seen as less valuable. I reflect that in the beginning of the COVID crisis, the folks on the front lines were low-paid women of color, like the same people, right? And these are the folks that we called essential in that moment of crisis, but we still have not put in place the policies and supports that they need in the care sector or otherwise to make sure that they have what they need to survive and thrive. And so, at the end of the day, investing in care is good for women. It's good for women of color in particular. It's good for our society, and it's good for our economy. Because when so many people are sitting on a foundation of economic precarity, our entire economy is sitting on a precarious foundation, right? And in this moment of multiple crises, we actually have a chance to reimagine what a healthy economy, a healthy society, and a truly inclusive one looks like, and invest in getting there. And care has to be a part of that. Because without a robust care infrastructure as a foundation, we're not going to be able to build towards that economy, and we're not going to be able to start to chip away at the pernicious racism and sexism that has gotten us here in the first place.
I completely agree. I want to kind of I echo everything you all said and just build on it about why this moment is different and what we have going for us in this moment. So I've been thinking about it of like the 5 C's that are going to lead us to the success of the care economy and the care infrastructure. So it's 1, we have committed administration. We have an administration absolutely committed to building back better with a care foundation. We have champions in Congress that are, amazing champions in Congress who are making sure that nobody, is left behind, right? That this is a huge issue that will be part of the budget. We have coalitions. We have amazing advocates across the country, grassroots advocates, national economists, just people all over who are fighting hard, who've been building together to have a foundation for a grassroots economy and who are ready to go. We have the public cry. It's a little push on the C, but it's a public cry, right? We have the public demand, right? We have greater awareness than ever before. And the media is talking about it. Public opinion is high. We are hearing about it every day in the news. And the 5th is coordinated funders. We actually have philanthropy coming together to work in a coordinated way on this. And I think that these 5 C's are going to lead us to the care agenda we need. Josie, do you want to follow that?
I don't have 5 anythings, and I was trained in a charismatic Christian church, so I love the 3 C's and the 5 C's. So I love that, Julie. I guess I will just add that it feels like a moment where no one went untouched, right? This country likes to have conversations in regards to the haves and the have-nots, and it was just one of those moments where nothing about this country was left untouched and unchanged in a moment of crisis, right? We've seen crises in this country, but they've been, Hurricane Katrina, where it's like down there in the South with those folks, but, us folks up here in New England states were good, or, there's sort of like these constant separations. That make the ability to relate to each other's struggles just really challenging sometimes. And the reality is, while the impacts were, of course, different based on various factors, the reality is that regardless of race, class, age, work, income, familial infrastructure, everyone really felt the disorienting factor of the pandemic crisis. And we were coming off of the heels of a pretty tough political 4 years, right? So those things combined was just this moment that you look to your left and to your right, and everyone was impacted one way or the other. And the resounding work of the disabilities community and the communities fighting for racial equity in care and economic access was suddenly felt by a large mass of people, much in the same way that a care crisis happens, right? Like oftentimes a care crisis happens overnight. All of a sudden you're put in a moment where you have to figure out, how is work going to happen? How is food going to get put on the table? Who's going to run these errands? Your typical day-to-day structure and rhythm is thrown off course. And it was one of those moments where you couldn't talk to anybody who wasn't trying to figure out Zoom for work and who wasn't trying to figure out what they were going to do since daycare was shut down for 2 days. And there were rumors that the adult daycare center was going to close next week, right? Everyone was in disarray in a common moment. And I guess one of my biggest hopes is that we don't lose that. We don't lose that ability to say we were all disoriented and something has to be done. Because while I can say that that didn't impact me, this moment impacted all of us and has to change in a way that works for all of us.
So, and a few of you have touched already on the racial equity and the racial justice implications of, the conversation we're having and the need to, pay people living wages, and the fact that this care work has been ignored because the majority of the time, historically, the people who are doing this care are, Black women, brown women, immigrant women. I know in my experience, all the caregivers, whether it's been a babysitter in my home, a nanny, interchangeable, childcare center, or a preschool, they've all the people that have taken care of my children have been women of color, have been immigrant women here in New York City. So, and you know, one of the things I say as a parent advocate all the time is I want the people that take care of my kids to earn a living wage. I want them to be able to call out sick and have health care. Because I don't want anybody who's sick to take, you know, I don't want them to get sick, but we have to also make sure that they don't get the kids that they're taking care of sick, right? So it just, all these things make sense, but it's not happening. So let's talk a little bit about that, those racial justice and racial equity implications of this conversation about care's infrastructure and care economy. And I don't know who wants to start. I will. Josie?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. I think it's worth noting that the history of care and the history of wealth inequity in this country are deeply, deeply intertwined, with the main common factor being the unpaid, the underpaid, and the unpaid care labor of Black women. The families that we know in this country that have generations of uncountable wealth relied on the unpaid care worker of Black enslaved women to build generations of farming and of labor and of care labor, right? All of that is deeply, deeply intertwined. So we have to start by acknowledging that care and wealth in this country is deeply intertwined. And we've had generations and cycles of time where racism in this country has been overt and covert. And the reality that we overcame a political moment where racism was so overt and then came on the back hills of the pandemic just puts that front and center in how we have to acknowledge and realize and actualize this moment. Then we've on top of that, all of the layers that definitely everyone on this panel knows, but I hope that most people listening also know. When we say low-wage workers, we're talking about mostly Black and Brown communities who are less likely to have access to paid time to care. A majority of low-wage workers, care workers or other workers, are women of color. We have to add on top of that women of color have been the hardest hit by the pandemic and its economic effects. And all of the things that we've all been working for a long time, that women of color and Black communities are most likely to have chronic illnesses. So when we talk about illness and the impact of illness, when we talk about childcare, we have to acknowledge that most women of color are likely to suffer during childbirth, right? And are also likely to be the primary breadwinners of their families. We're most likely to be making less money, right, over the course of our working lifetime. That puts retirement into jeopardy. It puts our ability to pass on generational wealth to other generations in jeopardy. And we're also, as Black women, most likely to be working later in life. This is on top of the chronic illnesses. This is on top of low wages. We're most likely to be working later in life, and are also most likely to be caregiving, whether that's as a profession or whether that's as unpaid, informal familial care. And all of those things impact the reality of where we are now. And I often think that if we solve for the disabled working Black woman, we're going to solve for everybody. If we get that right, and this is the moment to really get that right, that we're going to get it right for all. Instead of building on top of policies, infrastructures, and programs that were meant to perpetuate the wealth of working white men, we need to do it differently. We need to do it differently in a way that supports the infrastructure needed to make care work for everyone.
Us wanting all of that, I mean, all of it. And Josie, I really appreciated you talking about the both overt and covert racism and sexism that we've seen throughout history. And you covered the overt so well, so I thought I would touch a little bit on the covert part of it. And, you know, we've seen this undervaluation of care and care workers codified through our history, right? So we, for example, in the New Deal, it explicitly excludes domestic workers and agricultural workers who disproportionately Black, brown, and immigrant from huge benefits, huge safety nets that other workers got. And that was in large part because these racist Southern Democrats didn't want to give Black and brown workers privileges. And that kind of policy decision creates the space for cultural ideas to take root, right? So we've seen that those decisions get multiplied, copied and pasted over and over and over again over time. And we've seen conservatives, especially conservatives, but policymakers of all stripes, really start to embed patriarchal and sexist expectation about women and caregiving and who should do it in their broader narratives around individual responsibility, right? Caregiving is not meant to be a quote unquote collective responsibility, it's meant to be an individual one. And if you are not able to provide care, as the story goes, then it is your fault. And we see that in our history. I mean, Diana, you mentioned the story of President Nixon. 50 years ago, we came so close to what was the start of universal childcare, right? And doing so really would have destigmatized the government provision of care in a profound way. And yet, President Nixon vetoed the bill because he thought that it would support collective approaches to childcare over some sort of individualized approach, right? The racism is hidden there, but it's there. And so at the end of the day, our policy choices, create, whether they're active, proactive policy choices, or they're ones that we don't take, the roads that we don't go down, create space for cultural norms and conversations. And so what we need to do is really flip the script, because unless we start to recognize and correct for the enormous structural barriers based on race and gender that so many in our society are facing, we're never going to get to those policy choices that get us on the right path. And until we get those policy choices, we're not going to be able to reinforce the good norms and the good cultural and more inclusive cultural norms that we want to see. So at this moment, prioritizing care is so important because right now we have that window, right? We have a window to actually push through the policies that are going to set us up in a good way.
That is terrific, Raquin and Josie. I'll just add briefly, because I think you all really covered it so well, that it's important to appreciate how much we as a country sort of create these problems. And I think a lot about Josie's point, mothers of color work at higher rates. They're the primary source of income, breadwinner, disproportionately, certainly compared to Black mothers, especially, but even Latinx mothers compared to white mothers. And these things aren't a coincidence. It's not just a bunch of random individual choices. Among other things, we've decided to go on a path that hopefully we've at least paused on, and we certainly need to reverse, of criminalizing and incarcerating huge numbers of men of color. And so you've got a lot of women of color who are often the sole custodial parent. Doesn't mean that men of color aren't co-parenting in some way or another. In fact, there's lots of evidence that they're more engaged than white men are as fathers. So I think it's important for us to know that we have created a lot of the problems that we're facing, that these are policy choices, these are structures we have built, these are systems that in many ways do what the designers intended and what the opponents feared.
And I'll just kind of wrap up all of that just to say, that inherent in all of this is a conversation about power and resources, and that if we do not have a care infrastructure in place, that actually means that women, and especially Black and brown women of color, immigrant women, cannot build resources and cannot gain the type of power that is making decisions today, right? And so this is essential for us to build so that we can flip the script, right? So that we can actually, this is something Raquin and I have written about together, right? That, we have this vicious cycle of racism and sexism, and building a care agenda and building the care economy is, I think, probably the number one way to begin to change that and fight that vicious cycle.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the different care issues. We have childcare, we have paid leave, we have elder care, we have, Josie mentioned, people with disabilities, right? Supports for people with disabilities, care worker issues. Now we have the child tax credit, which, has been a blessing. I've read so many stories about what a difference it's making in the lives of so many families around the country. But a lot of times we talk about the issues separately, right? Like paid leave is here and elder care is here and supports for people with disabilities is over here. So why is it important to not talk about those in silos, but to break those silos so we can see it all as a package, right? It's a package. And I can't help, as I say that, I can't help but think the reason we do that is kind of because of this individualistic culture and like frame that we have, which is it's your responsibility. Like you had the child, it's your responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. But now we're at a point where we have realized because of COVID and because of what we started with earlier, which is everyone's going to get old. Everyone's going to probably have an older adult parent to take care of and have to go through all those things, right? So why is it important to talk about these issues, not in silos, but break those silos and kind of talk about the whole package, kind of this care infrastructure, right? I don't know. Julie, do you want to start? No.
Let's start with Indy.
All right. I'll jump in. Wow, it would be really great if people had such neat and organized lives that permitted them to not have to worry about more than one thing. But it turns out if you need one form of care, it does not mean you don't need another. In particular, we've made clear that people need care throughout their lifespans. I think a lot about, there was once a member of Congress who asked why it is that he should be paying for essentially OBGYN care for women in pregnancies and delivery. And I'm not sure if he came from an immaculate sort of birth or something, but one would see the connection quite clearly. We all need it. We all need it at some point. And your chance of disability roughly doubles going from age 40 to 50. And then again, from 50 to 60. This isn't just about retirement years. So the truth is, and the way that our lives work in this country, or should work, we need everything from an income floor and income replacement when providing care to a coherent and high quality childcare system. And we need attractive home and community-based services options for families as well. And we certainly need to make sure to achieve those goals that every care job is a decent one. But people are making just direct one-to-one, sometimes zero-sum trade-offs between helping the parents, helping their kids. And I would just also point out that I think one of the fundamental jobs of public policy and government is to make sure that people don't have to make impossible choices. Give them meaningful options so that they can make the best ones for their families. And to me, that's what this comes down to, is that care, essentially meeting people's care needs, gives them freedom, themselves, their families, their loved ones. So I think we have finally realized that these are false choices. We need an all of the above approach when it comes to care.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Indy said, that the reality is that families for a long time don't experience these issues in silos. It's likely that the primary person responsible for caregiving of an aging adult is also the primary person responsible for caregiving for their own child. And so these things are so connected in a deep, deep way. I also think the other thing that we have to be accountable for is always looking for the quick, simplest, easiest silver bullet solution. And we've spent the last decades in public policy thinking that if we fix this one thing, it will somehow unravel and impact all of the other inequities. And I think we're in a moment where the reality is we can't pick the one thing because there isn't a silver bullet, because of the way the systems and because of how families experience life and public policy. We can't separate these things in such an easy, clean, and concrete way. And then in addition to sort of setting families up in these false choices where you have to pick between paying for rent or paying for childcare or, paying for getting your car fixed or getting to your parents' house to drop off their groceries, right? Those false choices. The reality is like we've created a 360-degree environment that supports those false choices. So when I think about the revenue conversations that often happen through public policies, where we, even our own communities, are being asked to prioritize what gets what level of funding first and then what comes next and at what levels, we're sort of in this constant environment where we're being asked to pick and choose what goes first and what's most urgent and pressing. And while families have never experienced things in that way, I feel like the pandemic was a moment where it made clear that actually everybody's pressure point is care, and with where that care crisis is happening within that pressure point can vary, but the reality is that all of that is happening at the same time. And then we're also in this like economic aha moment where, other people other than us are realizing that if you don't make enough money and if you don't have adequate work benefits, then it actually means that you can't take care of your family, you can't plan for retirement, and you can't, contribute to your environment and your economy the way you want. So this sort of like interconnected life happens in a full sort of way, and there aren't these clean sort of you're born and you get a good education, then you graduate and you get a good job, and then maybe you get married and then you have kids, and then you age as this like 70-year-old surfer in California with 3, right? Like these sort of images of who we are as a country just don't bode true anymore. And I think we're in a moment where public policy is having to reckon with that in a way where we can't put anything in front of anything else. And we need a full family policy movement. And that's where we are now.
Yeah, just to reinforce what's already been said, sometimes I think we are so focused on the policy solution in front of us, we sort of lose sight of why we need these policies in the first place, right? And when we're siloing solutions, it limits our imagination, first of all, around the types of interventions we actually need to solve real people's problems. And it keeps us from making the types of policy decisions that really address the interconnected ways that people experience these issues, like in a day-to-day way. People don't live siloed lives, as Indy and Josie have already said. And, at Groundwork, we often say we are the economy. It's this idea that our economic health is when we, all of us, are healthy and doing well and on secure footing. And our policy should really reflect that, right? A laundry list of policies is actually not what's going to get us to the solution. It's actually reimagining what our economy should really look like, and then starting to build up from the bottom, like what are the policies that help us get there?
So before I dive into the next question, I just wanted to highlight that every single example that Josie gave about, people having to make decisions about whether they're going to pay for rent or childcare or buy food or fix their car, those are actual examples that we have heard, advocates have heard over and over and over again throughout this pandemic. It was happening before, right? People were already food insecure before the pandemic, for example. Cars were breaking down before the pandemic, but now it's like times 100, right? And I think that goes back to like, why is this moment important? Why is this the moment? In addition to Julie's C's. So the next thing we're going to talk about is kind of where things stand in Congress. Like what is happening and what can we do to kind of, and
get us over the edge.
Yes.
I can get us started on this
in
one.
a good way.
Yes, a good edge. The secretary spoke a little bit about this, right? That right now we have, President Biden proposed the Build Back Better plan that included significant funding for child care and early learning, for paid family and medical leave, and for home and community-based services. All of that built on a framework that would raise working conditions for those working in the care sector. And Congress is currently considering that. There is a $3.5 trillion budget proposal that includes those proposals in it. We don't know all the details of what's included, but we know that all of those pieces are a part of that big budget proposal. So right now, the push is to make sure that they all stay in it. And actually, as we're talking about this, should also mention the child tax credit and expanding the child tax credit, making it permanent. It's another important part of this, this whole package of thinking about what families really need to raise children and care for children, to support their families, to support their loved ones, and be healthy and financially stable. So, Congress is looking at this right now. The push is on right now. And, one of our audience members said something about, we have the 5 C's, but do we have the 6th C, which is the count in Congress. So that's kind of everybody's job. That's the job of the advocates and the grassroots activists, to make sure we do have the count in Congress. Someone else want to follow?
Yeah, I think there's a few things I would add. So there's a lot moving in Congress. There's, it's talked about in a lot of different ways, reconciliation packages and bills and all of these things. Ultimately, it's really important to know that there are both the benefits and the things that we want and the vehicles through which we can move things. And sometimes it means not everything we want is going to move through every vehicle, just like, you can't get a large couch in a Toyota, but you might be able to get it, in an open bed truck. So there's a real opportunity to move a lot right now, but it requires a level of persistent vigilance on all of our parts. Because in some moments it's going to come down to the money. And once you set a budget for your household, you have to figure out where that money is going to go. And there is a temptation to say, okay, with limited funds, this is only going to get this much and this is only going to get this much. And we're going to cut here so that the budget fits, right? So there's sort of all of these things that we have to be persistently vigilant about. But it is a real opportunity to see care legislation move at the federal level and to see real funding applied in a meaningful way to the things that we want. So there's the federal stuff that's going on, but I also want to encourage all of us listening that states have a lot of power. State governments have a lot of power. There's power in how previous federal dollars are being spent at the state level. So everyone should be asking your governors and your state level elected officials, what are you doing with the money that's already come down from the federal government? And what's the plan for any money that comes down? You should be asking your state lawmakers. There's no reason every state shouldn't already have a robust paid family and medical leave law. We don't have to wait for the federal government to do it. We've seen states do it. We've seen states take on initiatives for affordable childcare, increase worker wages, protect benefits for care workers, right? These are things that we don't have to wait. Just like families can't wait, states don't have to wait for the federal government. Now, do federal dollars help move that along? Sure. So we should definitely be advocating for that. And then the other thing that I'll just say is we're in a moment where this sort of like shadow over talking politics needs to be something that goes away as much as we're advocating for the old care infrastructure to go away. Talk to your family members, talk to your parents, talk to voters in your family about care issues, about their personal interests, about what their future and their current looks like. The reality is that more than ever, people are voting for the issues that directly impact their lives and those who have solutions that match the scale of the crisis and impact we're experiencing. And people need to really think like that as voters. And Black communities are disproportionately affected by the policy issues that we're talking about today, and that often takes center stage in election cycles. And the reality is whether you're state elected or federal elected, this is a moment to do something so that the election cycle is about what you've already done, not the promises of what you're going to do. People aren't looking for promises anymore. We're looking for the direct impacts to our lives. And I think that's really, really important for us to keep in mind, to have the conversations of not just the issues, the policy issues, and what's needed in public policies, but to connect it with the political. That's really important. And that's often how we perpetuate the inequities around us, by voting in a way that doesn't actually match the public policies that we want to see that actualize the things that we need for our families.
I'll just add one small thing. You know, we heard Secretary Walsh say at the beginning, this is not an allocation, it's an investment. And I think that's really important. We're not just spending money for money's sake. We're actually spending money because it is important for the people who live their lives every day in this country, right? And I will also add that the risk of spending too little at this moment far exceeds the risk of spending too much. There is plenty to go around for all of the issues that we care about. I mean, we didn't get to touch on it today because this is such a big topic, but there's so many intersections between climate policy and care policy, between our labor force policies and our care policies, between how we, address private power and our care policies. We can and need all of it. And I encourage us as advocates and as thinkers about these issues to not back down and not get swayed or distracted by some of these disingenuous arguments that we're starting to see pop up, because it is absolutely urgent that we invest in this system, in our care infrastructure, and in the people who make up our economy.
And that is a perfect segue to a question we got from the audience, which is, how can we make the job of caretakers and care workers better?
All right, I'll start. I would say we often think about a few things. We think about wages. Wages are really important. And care work is one of the fastest growing industries in this country, and yet one of the lowest paid worker industries in this country. And it's incredibly important that wages increase. It's sort of the connective tissue for care workers all over. And I will reinforce something Indy said, that no country can fix their care infrastructure without large investments from the federal government. And while we talk to lots of families who quickly get to the point of agreeing to pay their workers more, the reality is that their personal wallets can't afford it. So there's a role for government to play in what we're talking about. So we talk about wages a lot. We also talk about benefits. A lot of care workers don't have retirement benefits, don't have paid leave, they don't have affordable childcare, and honestly also don't have the right to form unions and for collective bargaining, which is critical for worker protections in our country. So I often think about wages, benefits, and the other thing that I think about is real meaningful career ladders. This can happen at the state or at the federal level. We have incredibly amazing and experienced care workers that are locked into a particular place of work and can't move across career ladders. Sometimes it's because the wages aren't worth it, and sometimes it's because there isn't recognized training and certification in given states and at the federal level. So I think that's huge. And I will just tag team it to Julie real quick to add to that, but to also talk about demolishing some of the lack of protections that were set up at the federal level for care workers.
Thanks, Josie. Absolutely. And the National Domestic Workers Alliance works really hard to make sure that home care workers and nannies and house cleaners, those people who work in homes, are included in our labor protections, and has been fighting for a domestic worker bill of rights to make sure that
that we don't just think about people who work in childcare centers and, that the folks that we kind of see every day, but also the invisible workforce that we don't see every day. And I think that's so important. The other piece just to mention is that, and I know, Josie, you talk about this a lot, like it's also about the family caregivers and making sure that family caregivers are well supported, making sure that if you take time out of the workforce to care for someone, that it's not only that you have paid leave, but also that your Social Security is getting paid for, right? That you're not going to lose out on your retirement security over time because of that. So I think it's kind of a big picture of both paid and unpaid workforce, and we are caregivers, and we need to think about both of them.
Yes, and that, when you stop to think about like the women that leave the workforce and choose to stay home, and then you think about what the financial implications of that decision is. Like when I am a freelancer, I thought about that one day. I looked at what my husband was putting into his retirement and what his company matched. And then I thought about where I was, and I was it's absolutely just mind-blowing / just maddening, but that's a whole topic for another conversation. So I quickly want to go and kind of wrap this up. On my podcast, every time I end, I always ask about action, right? So what is kind of one thing that people listening can do, after we end here? To kind of move the needle forward. There's a lot of momentum, like the members of Congress are talking about these budgets, how much money is going to be allocated to what. So tell us what can people do to get it through the finish line? Let's not say over the cliff, to the finish line.
Great. So I have 2 recommendations. First, I would be amiss, and my staff might kill me if I don't say, check out Family Values at Work. We have a really robust email list. We have a really robust digital presence, and we're always constantly pushing out trustworthy information and actions that we could take to really build the care economy that we want. And the other thing that I will say is that we need to have these conversations across multiple people all the time. There's so much information out there that finding an opportunity to talk to someone about what care looks like now, whether it's for you personally or what you heard on this call, and what care could look like, and the role that every voice plays in really getting us to a place where we have a care economy that works for everyone is critical. So find Family Values at Work online and share one nugget you learned today with someone that's in your sphere of conversation.
I love that. I'll just say real quick, I think this power of stories, it's so important. And I appreciate this is a group of people who could talk about policy and data and stats till the cows come home, but like starting the conversation grounded in our own personal stories and why we're here and how care has impacted us or impacts us on a regular basis made it just much more powerful to have this conversation grounded in, the community that we are all a part of, that the Secretary spoke of. So share your stories.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'll just add, everyone's story is, on the one hand, totally unique, and on the other, it's not exceptional. I mean, everyone struggles here, and I think policymakers need to understand that. So I would say, tell your stories and then organize so that there's a collective voice out there. And of course, hold your policymakers accountable.
Yeah, agree with all of that. And I will just add, this policy moment that we're in is just one bead in a long string of beads, right? There have many that came before, and there will be many that come after. So keep fighting and keep pushing, because we can't afford to get complacent, right? There's no one silver bullet or one sort of moment that's going to fix this crisis. We have to continually look to make our society and economy work for caregivers, the people who provide, and the people who need care.
All right, well, I think we're at time. Big thanks to Diana for moderating this, and it was a true delight to join Josie, Raquin, Julie. Thanks also for co-hosting this conversation with us at George Johnson on poverty and inequality. And for all of you who joined, again, we're grateful. And a recording of the event will be made available immediately afterward at tcf.org, the Century Foundation's website, where you can also learn about future events.
A final thank you to Secretary of Labor and his team, to Gloria Riviera, and to the entire TCS team who made this